And now that I'm looking at my notes, that actually was a good place to stop compared to where I wanted to go next week. So, all right, what did you think of that start? Was that a good start? Is that making some sense? All right. So this is the afterburn, which is the time that we have our thoughts and our questions, be able to be expressed and get some answers maybe to some questions. So,
well, my question starts here when you were talking about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So I know that you've explained knowledge is relational. So does that, and information, applied information is knowledge. So when we apply the information, we have a relationship with it. So is this kind of explaining that once they ate of this, it gave them a relationship with good and evil?
Right. Again, we talked about skill sets, discernment, the idea to discriminate and see things in different ways. And then, of course, once you can do that, you can then choose to do good or evil. In other words, you can do something that benefits somebody and blesses them or something that causes harm and suffering. They had no concept of harm and suffering at this point. This is now an awareness they had for the first time. They'd never seen any. It's not been discussed anywhere up to this point. So now they're aware of something they had never been aware of before.
Is that where our evil inclination would come from, you think?
Well, we're going to get to that next week.
Okay.
Okay? Because we're going to talk about when we get to know whether the thoughts of the hearts of there was on evil continually. Okay? All right. Taylor.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi.
Okay, when you were talking about being in the spirit and not the flesh, were you speaking, I'm trying to get my brain to understand this, were you speaking in a way that was like, I'm trying to see if those two things are separate, like
Which two things?
The Ruach, and then you were speaking about the Ruach, right? Not like okay. Like, I'm trying to see, because I know that we have, is our like spirit, is it like different from what the Ruach could be, like a human spirit?
All right.
You know what I'm trying to talk
Yes.
about? Okay.
All right. I do speak incomplete sentences. Okay, so I understand them. All right. I took that as a second language. Incomplete sentences is a second language. All right. Look, let's not, see, we struggle because we have words that are no longer really functional the way they should be because of the way Christianity has used them forever and messed them up. Okay, just to be blunt. And so when we talk about the Ruach, and I didn't mention the word Ruach really, because Ruach I talk about from the point of view as the means by which they're doing things. And that's not what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about spirit from the understanding, the spirit teaching as the fullness of the intention. Okay, so the fullness of the intention of the above is expressed through the spirit. The fullness of the intention of the below is expressed through the flesh. Okay? And so this is not so much when it talks about walking in the Spirit, it's not necessarily the Holy Spirit Ruach thing. We're walking in the fullness of how they intend things to be walked. By your choice, you're choosing to do that. Okay?
Okay.
Did that help?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
And praise Yah, I do praise Yah that when I hear people, he gives me almost immediately an understanding of what they're trying to say, because it's so hard to say it. And I'm not saying that in a bragging, I'm saying it, I realize how hard it is sometimes to say or ask the question. So I have to then take what little you have said and figure out what it is you're actually asking. And I really appreciate, Abba, that you allow me to do that. Okay.
Okay.
Nadia.
Hi, Rabbi. Question. You said that if we choose not to keep Shabbat or not to do certain things we're supposed to do, it's evil and it is our consequences on us. Yet, if we don't keep it and our children don't follow up and we don't, because we're supposed to be the role models to our children, would be causing evil to our children.
Well, we're going to get more into how that works as far as what you bring on yourself and what you don't. Ezekiel 18 is going to have a little bit to do with that as far as suffering on behalf of what the predecessors do. There's a certain amount of it that does have longer term effects. In other words, if I do something that financially ruins my family, that may have an effect on my children, because it may have a generational effect till somebody figures it out and fixes it. But also, we have the longer-term effects when people imitate the bad behavior. So you do certain way, and if they imitate it, then that's going to cause and bring them evil or harm or suffering as well. But what I was trying to bring out with the Shabbat point, I could have brought up the kashrut point. You may be thinking, so I eat pork, who does it hurt? Well, it only hurts you. So it's not causing anybody else harm, so it's not evil from that point of view, but it's hurting you. Okay, so it's bringing that way. Because a lot of times people try to look through these things only on a causality to somebody else, like you're doing it to somebody. Well, you're doing it to yourself. Okay? Now, as far as your question, I know you're trying to figure out your responsibility with your children. Okay, I get that. And that's trying to understand what the question really is. And I get that. That's a big question. And the answer to that is very important for all of you to listen to. Listen, I got a lot of counseling during the week of people with their adult children especially. You have a very limited responsibility for your children, a greater one when they're first born, and it diminishes over time to the point where they are to be looked at as an adult. And then your responsibility is almost zero, okay? When I say almost zero, meaning only at that point whatever they allow you and you want to have. But you have a default responsibility full when they come out of the womb because they can do nothing. And over time, they start to make their own decisions, and then you're losing your burden of responsibility, and they're gaining the burden of responsibility for their own actions, all right? So with our children, especially when they get to be teenagers, we have to recognize that the vast majority of them do not have their bubble popped. They just don't, okay? Most of you didn't when you were a teenager, okay? And so what we have going on then with this whole situation is you have to recognize that they become more and more responsible for their choices. Ultimately, I guess when they turn 20, we look at them as the age of majority, then okay, they're 20 and they own everything. But I've got people calling me up, and if you think I'm talking about you, sure I am. But believe this happens lots of times a week. I get a mother or a father, usually it's the mom, having an issue with a 47-year-old daughter or son, or a 23-year-old daughter or son, and I'm like, do they live in your house? No. Well, then there's nothing you can do. You can only be there to give counsel and advice if they're willing to hear it. But you have no responsibility at that point. I know it's hard to watch them hurt themselves. As a parent, it's never fun to watch your child do destructive things to themselves, stuff that will bring harm and evil on themselves. But there's nothing you can really do except up to a point. So to Nadia's question, keep Shabbat, set the example. Keep the commandments, set the example. Encourage your children to do it, all right? I tell my children, now that they're 16 and 18, okay, I would tell my children, it's sundown. Now, what they do after sundown has to do with the way I rule my house, as far as what I allow in my house, more than it has to do with my enforcing it on them. Does that make sense? I simply let them know it's sundown. It's Shabbat. Now, I have, and you might have in your own house, things that you believe are appropriate to be done in your house because it's your house, and that if they want to do other things, they can do it when they're not in your house. And that's fine. You should have those expectations set with your children. Hey, you're 20 years old now, but you're living in my house. In my house, these things don't get done on Shabbat. Okay? You want to go do them? Go somewhere else. I can't make them keep Shabbat. So I don't make my children do anything at this point. 16 and 18. They have to make their own choices. I may, because it's my house, though, go around and say, by the way, it's sundown. I'm as guilty as anybody. I got wrapped up in something the other day. My daughter came around and said, hey, Dad, it's sundown. Anybody can get caught up in anything, okay? She did. She was concerned. I was like, no, I just completely wasn't paying attention. And I appreciated that she came around, Because you can get busy right before sundown, especially when the time changes. And we were used to 8:30, and now all of a sudden it's 5:30. And so here it's getting there 5:30, and I'm thinking still in my head, I got like 3 hours. No, it's sundown. Janet.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was awesome. There's so much in the teaching, but I'll ask you after. But I have one that is burning, which is the me. You were saying the flesh, right? So you cannot please Elohim in that mindset, you said. So I guess my question is, how do you discern? I mean, if it's something that you're It's a desire you have that is not opposed to Torah. How do we know if that's purely flesh as opposed to coming from the Spirit from above? And
all right. Look, desire in itself is not a problem. It's what we desire and how much we desire and how we go about getting our desires. And, of course, whether those desires are in line with the above. Because the above really doesn't concern itself with every single thing you could possibly want. Okay, there's lots of things you could desire that the above really allows you to have that freedom. You could desire to learn how to play an instrument. You could desire to learn how to be a gourmet chef. You could desire to be an attorney. You could desire anything. It's how does that desire manifest? Does it turn into an obsession that causes you to have, to cost other areas of your life? Does it become out of balance? Does it become, there's lots of ways that we can look at this. So first question is, you desire something. Is there anything about that desire that is a conflict to the above? And if the answer is no, then you're probably okay to desire it. Now the next thing is looking at the appropriateness of the desire, the timing in your life, everything else that's going on, the things you're trying to juggle and balance. But it's when the emotion becomes dominant, which happened with Chava. Even if it wasn't just that Yahweh said not to do it, she got wrapped up in, well, it looks good. She's probably been looking at it the whole time. It was probably a fruit that she said, that looks really delicious. I just gotta want to try that. And so that's where we start to crave. Okay, so maybe you think of the word craving different than desire. Okay, when you're craving something. We often crave things that even though Torah might allow for it, are not really good for us. And Paul talks about there's lots of things that are allowable that are not good. They're allowable, not good for you. You can gorge on sugar, it's allowable, it's terrible for you. All right? And so hopefully that answers the question, Janet, all right? All right, Steve?
You talked about, you had asked why it seemed that many, or they didn't choose to eat from the tree of life, and that how we don't maybe as readily as we could today. And I was just thinking, could it be that the tree of life isn't as appealing because it doesn't serve our sight and our mind and our desires? It has borders and barriers and do nots. So when we go to make the choice, we would rather serve ourselves than serve what brings life. So that could be the reason I thought that why we don't choose so easily or so readily to eat of the tree of life.
All right. I mean, it's. I like the way you said that, I guess. But here's the way I would add this. Remember, we are by default in a fleshly mind, and the fleshly mind is at odds with the spiritual mind. And so when we understand the tree of life is the spiritual mind, we will have a natural tendency at times to have an aversion to it. Because after all, the flesh knows that to go in that direction is going to kill it. And the flesh doesn't want to die. Okay? All right. Live stream.
Okay, from asking for a friend, in Genesis 2:7, what is meant by the word lives? Why is it in plural?
That's going to take too much of an explanation. So let's go ahead and skip that for now. I will answer that question. If you bring it up at another point, it's, I tend to give these long answers and then we don't get a lot of questions, and that one's going to take too much.
Okay. I'll just ask you, Rabbi, do you want me to just kind of get the ones with just today's subject? Because there's a lot of questions on here just like, about the spirit. If they were, you were talking about, they weren't in a flesh suit yet, so they're like, well, what were they? Or just, they're going through all these other questions.
That's fine. And actually, I'll give you the breath of life answer real quick. I'll just give you a short answer. The flesh dies. So all flesh, okay, do caterpillars and lions and tigers and bears, oh my, all have the breath of life that we're talking about? No. They have life and then they die. We have breathed into us the breath of lives where we can live again. Does that help answer the question? It's different. Okay. And now, ask whatever. I don't want to filter it. I'll
Okay.
let you filter it as best you can.
All right.
I could always just say no.
Okay, from Jose, it says, Rabbi, if you think Adam and Eve were initially spirits, why was Eve taken from the rib of Adam in Genesis 2:21?
I didn't say they were spirits. I said they didn't necessarily have a flesh suit. I don't know exactly what they were. Remember, we're like amoebas understanding human beings. Okay? Look, the Nachash wasn't originally looking like a snake either. Nachash was standing there talking to Eve, to Chava, and then the punishment was to go ahead and crawl on the belly. But we picture, the snake wrapped around the branches of the tree talking to her. No, that was a consequence of what he did, that he became the one crawling on its belly. All right? So, let's just keep that in mind. I'm just saying that they were not necessarily, according to the way this sounds like, if they hadn't eaten from the tree, they never would have died. Flesh dies. So now that they could die, they're put in a flesh suit so that, guess what? They can die. Without a flesh suit, you live forever. So I don't know what they look like. And here's something else that really is important that we understand. And I want to say, don't misunderstand me, please. I'm not saying, well, let me say it this way. Everything in your scripture is literal. And everything in your scripture is not literal. Does that clarify for you? Okay? So yes, there was an Adam and a Chava, and yes, she was formed from him, but the stuff that's not necessarily literal, which we don't always know which, is expressed in a way so that we can understand it. I'll say something that's very unpopular. The Father and the Son are not literally father and son. That's a human idea. The best way we can understand them is father and son. But there was not a mother and a father who gave birth in the beginning in John 1 to the Word. That's why they say he's like the only brought forth from a father. It's a picture for us. The closest analogy we as human beings can understand is father-son. And that's the way Yeshua sees him and the way he sees Yeshua, as father-son, when expressing that relationship to human beings. Okay? And so this idea of her coming from a rib, I'm sure she came from something from him. But to explain that to us humans, this is the way it was explained to us humans. All right? So I'm not saying that it wasn't a rib. I'm just saying we don't understand the literalness of things and the analogies being given so that we can understand that she was taken from him and formed from something from him. Okay? All right. Next.
From Daphne, neighbors, since they didn't have knowledge of good and evil, does that mean Hava didn't know she was doing wrong when she ate of the fruit?
Okay. I like the question because it shows that people aren't listening. Not that you're not listening, you're so hard to swim upstream against what you always think. So you're saying that doing wrong is evil, which it isn't necessarily. Because you're saying that if she didn't have a knowledge of evil, then she didn't know what she was doing was wrong. No, she knew it was wrong because he told her not to do it. Okay, doing something that you're not supposed to do doesn't always bring harm, and she certainly didn't know that there would be harm coming from doing wrong. So let's say that until she ate from the tree, she had no thought of harm. She hid because she was afraid of the harm. Now, she knew it was wrong. She just didn't understand what the consequences of wrong were. Evil is a consequence. Receiving evil, punishment, suffering, harm, pain, destruction, ruin, whatever. So again, I don't blame the person who asked the question this way. It's because we've all been brainwashed and trained and indoctrinated and well-churched up to this point. So it's so hard to see things differently. So don't equate wrong and evil. Doing wrong will bring evil, but knowing something's wrong doesn't mean you know it's going to bring evil. How many of you ever did something wrong and were shocked when you actually had the harm that came? Because you thought, oh, it's innocent, it's no big deal. I do this thing, it's wrong to do, I know, but it's nothing bad's going to happen. I'm not going to have any harm from it. So she did know, because he told her, this is wrong. Do not eat of this tree. Okay? Now, maybe the concept of right and wrong wasn't really there either. Maybe it was just more the idea of, I said to do this and I said not to do this. And maybe she quite, at that point, didn't understand that doing what I say is right, not doing what I say is wrong. But she knew she was being disobedient. She knew she was told one thing. She even says it to the serpent. It says, no, he said we're not supposed to do this. Now, of course, she changed what he said a little bit, but she still knew she shouldn't eat it, and she chose to do it anyway. That's rebellion. That's disobedience. And that, after she did it, she realized harm might come from this, because those are the kinds of things that bring harm. And so they hid. Why did your child hide? Because they're afraid you're going to spank them. They're afraid of the harm and the pain that might be coming, or that they expect is coming. So yes, I'm not sure if she knew it was wrong. I know she knew it was disobedience. Because right and wrong may be a tough concept at this point in her life. Okay? Because after all, there hasn't been a whole lot of examples of anything being done that was wrong. But she was told, don't do this, and she chose to do it. And now she learned that it's wrong and it's evil. It brings evil. Okay? Now you could say that you could make an argument that what she did wasn't evil because it didn't cause harm to, anybody as far as eating from the tree, or you could say that it was evil because it caused harm to her and Adam and everybody else that was involved. See how you can look at it different ways. Remember, evil is through the perception of the one who's either observing it or receiving it or experiencing it. All right, so it did no evil to Yahweh, it didn't cause him any harm, didn't hurt the tree, but everybody else involved got all kinds of harm. So from that point of view, evil was experienced. All right? Okay, Rob, go ahead.
From Yaakov Yudin, the nakedness of Adam and Eve was if the nakedness of Adam and Eve was a metaphor, what did them covering themselves up with the leaves refer to?
Again, it's a metaphor for the idea of realizing you're uncovered and you need to cover yourself. I want you to think of the word nakedness as more like exposed, and now they're using a picture for you to picture covering something that's exposed. I'm not saying it didn't literally play out that way, but I'm trying to give you the more vital understanding. Is that they felt safe and covered and protected and everything you can imagine, and now they are exposed. Their covering isn't there. They're like on their own. Okay?
From Catherine Dweem, says, why couldn't they eat from the tree of life?
I never said they couldn't. I said, isn't it interesting that they chose not to? And then before they could do it, or lest they would do it, they got kicked out. So they couldn't do it. All right? See, this again shows it. I know this is hard. I don't know how to explain to you. This is why you need to listen more than once. I'm not saying that in a condescending or attacking way. You need to listen more than once, because the first time, your filters will block half of what I said, and you won't hear it. Because I said the answers to most of these questions in the teaching, but you can't receive it the first time through because you're fighting up against it with what you already think you know. Okay? You're literally fighting against what I'm saying with what you already think you understand. You have to go back and try to unload all that and just receive. Okay? All right, next.
Okay, from Spartacus is in Genesis 3:15. It says, enmity was put forth between the woman's seed and the serpent. Some allude Cain is the seed of Hasatan. Is this evidence that there was relations in the garden between them?
Okay. The prophetic sort of he pronounced this sort of punishment on them okay? And all these things were going to happen outside the garden because the whole tilling the ground and everything else with the sweat and all this stuff was going to happen outside the garden. But let's not get into verse 15 today. Verse 15 is used by lots of people, and with good reason, to try to understand the relationships between those of the seed of Elohim and those who are of Hasatan, and what's happening in terms of, crushing the heel and, crushing the head and crushing the heel and these things. I don't want to get into that, but that's not part of the teaching today.
Okay, Donna Stevens, Genesis 3, verses 9 and 10. Could we take Abba's questions as a measuring stick for us every day? Where are we in our walk today? Are we on track? Do we need to seek counsel before we step out from under the covering?
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly take it from there. That's not what he's talking about. You could take it from there. I mean, he's really talking about it when you're hiding from him, okay? But I think you certainly I like what you said. I think that's a really great point. But here it's more about when you know you did something wrong and you're hiding from him. And that's what you want to be asking yourself. Am I hiding from Elohim? Is there something that I've done that's causing me to hide from him? Because he's sitting there going, where are you? In other words, he wasn't asking where are you like he didn't know where they were. He's like, why are you hiding?
From Helen Thrasher was Genesis 3, verse 12, the beginning of the blame game that we do today.
Sure. Absolutely. That's why I've given you these really powerful memes. Own it, fix it, move on. That's one of the things I've talked to you about, right? Own it, fix it, release it. But you got to own it. As long as you're pointing a finger at somebody, you can't get past the thing you're dealing with because you're now needing somebody else to deal with it so you can get past it. You need to own it. Okay? If they had owned it, who knows how different this may have played out. But nobody owned anything. Everybody's pointing a finger. Actually, Hasatan didn't say a word because he didn't even get a choice. He wasn't even asked, like, what did you do? Because you know what? He knew who he was talking to, and he knew he was busted. Okay? There wasn't anything to say. He knew what he did, and he knew that Elohim knew what he did. See, these two young people here in the garden didn't know him as well as Hasatan knew him. So they're still trying to figure him out. They thought they could hide from him. Okay? We should hopefully know better. You can't hide from him. All right, Brian.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi, and thank you for this
Shalom.
teaching. With this newly expanded upon definition of evil and how evil isn't always wrong, how evil is often a consequence or the consequence of doing wrong, it really made me think about, especially depending upon who the person is. You might see something as evil, whereas I don't see it as evil, but it made me think about, what Yeshua told us when we're told to have the mind of Messiah, right? And ultimately we know that Messiah has the mind of the Father. And it goes back to, I think one of your teachings is whose side are you right in? And ultimately, I think it's safe to say in this walk, we care what is right and wrong in the eyes of the Father. And it brought me to Devarim 30, verse 19, where he says, I have called the heavens and the earth as witnesses today against you. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore you shall choose life so that you live, both you and your seed. And what that made me think about was when we have the option to choose life and death, when we choose death, we choose to be friends with the world and receive the world's false version of love and the world's false version of blessing. But at the same time, we're going to reap the cursing and the blessing from Yahweh. Or we can choose life and receive real love, real compassion, real blessing. And at the same time, we're going to receive evil from the world. We're going to receive evil one way or the other. But would we rather receive evil from the world or receive evil from the Father?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, good point. All right, Deirdre.
I have a comment and a question. Is that okay?
We'll see. Pick whichever one's more important and do it first.
I'll do the question first. Okay. So in Genesis 3:16 through 17, he's handing out the punishments. And I know a lot of people who don't understand so much the structure, and I'm still trying to figure it out too. They, well, people outside even the church, one of the main questions is, well, why did he just punish Adam and Chava? They were the ones that messed up. And I'm trying to, I guess, figure out how was mankind tainted, and why was it not just them that they were punished? Was it something that happened physically to them, mentally, or does it go back to I will punish down to the third and fourth generation, or is it something I'm missing entirely?
No, it's probably more like the third and fourth generation thing. Look, he's saying, some of these things we're all suffering with, which is the idea of tilling the ground and working hard. But you know what? There are parts of the world where it's not so hard, and other parts where it's much harder. So it's not. What he's saying is you're not having the simplicity of this perfect paradise, which Gan Eden was a perfect paradise. You're going to be in a world where some things go well, sometimes they don't. Some things are easy, some things are hard. Sometimes it's the same thing. It's easy one time, it's hard the next time. And so that's more what's going on here. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not a big original sin. We're all doomed just because Adam was an idiot, that's just doesn't make any sense. All right?
I guess I'm wondering, why didn't Yahweh maybe take the descendants and give them a chance at the garden?
He does. This through Yeshua, we all get to have a chance at the garden.
Okay. I was just thinking originally. Okay.
Okay. Well, look, he put them in there and realized that they were not going to stay there and behave right.
Okay.
So I'm going to put them in a place where they don't have access to the tree of life, and they're going to be able to die. And then they can work this all out as they grow into maturity there.
Okay. So I guess my comment was when you mentioned the two trees in the middle. This is so weird the way my brain works. You probably know where I'm going with it already. With the two trees, the two choices, the matrix popped in my head. It's reversed. Instead, you have the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You have the red pill and the blue pill, except this time, when you take the red pill and your eyes are opened, it's just awful and terrible. And you're not fighting to end a bad system, you're fighting against a good system. But if they had continued taking the blue pill, the tree of life, they would have not known what this horrible existence, could possibly be. So I don't know if you agree on that or...
I think all of this, I know this is going to be shocking, is exactly how Yahweh intended it to play out.
Okay.
I think that he never thought they were going to stay in the garden. I think that he knew they were going to eat of the tree. I think that he knew that man needed to go through a process of being tested to prove, and that would never have happened without this happening.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
All right, good. All right, Ms. Shira.
I'm visorless because I've been uncovered. Exposed, actually. This wonderful, wonderful message, it just keeps going deeper and deeper. And I would like to just share, by way of comment, a testimony, if I may, and it has to do with Romans 8, verse 12. For the first time just now, as you were teaching, I began to understand when he says, you're not a debtor to the flesh. And I began to actually be able to relate that to something I've been through recently, which you know some of because of counseling. But in Christianity, I had well over 5 decades of engaging in activities that used my talents and upfront abilities and all of that. And it was so interwoven into my identity that I got to a place where I felt, even though it fed my flesh, it fed my ego all those years, as Christianity will tend to do, it was so entwined in my identity that I kept, even though all these wonderful opportunities have opened up for me here in this season of my life. I felt I was a debtor to go back. I owed it to Yahweh to go back and somehow try to resurrect in a Torah context many of the things that I had identified with in Christianity that were part of my activities. And I realized what a bondage it was, and I shared that with you. It was just bothering me all the time. And I just decided I've got to let that go. I've got to drop that. And what you don't know is that I went through 2 or 3 weeks of throwing tantrums over it, during which time, quiet tantrums, but during which time I remembered what you taught from James, weep and howl, and just get it out of your system.
Yeah.
But I have to say, this really applies, that I finally understand I don't owe the flesh anything, even if it's something that seemed to be good. It seemed to bring, but it wasn't bringing good to myself, and I had to let it go. And so I just praise Father. I'm over the tantrums. I'm really enjoying so many new opportunities to engage in activities that are more appropriate to my mature age and abilities. And there's a really wonderful contentment. And I do want to just thank you for your numerous words of encouragement for me in the scripture reading. That is unexpected and very much a blessing and encouragement, especially what I've just been going through. So praise Yahweh.
Awesome.
We don't owe anything to the flesh.
Amen. Amen. All right, Steve.
Okay, let's see if I can get this. I'm trying to put it together here, but when you talked in Genesis 2:9 about the tree of good and evil, but can we see it as maybe the tree of wisdom? Because wisdom isn't knowledge. Knowledge is the information you have learned, while wisdom is the ability to use that knowledge in a profound way. So the knowledge is a part and wisdom is the whole. Wisdom goes beyond learning facts. It includes making sense of the facts. So if you look at evil, wouldn't that be the transgression of the way something was designed to be used or do?
Okay, I agree with everything except that you're connected to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I mean, I like what you said about wisdom and comparing that to knowledge and all of that. But you remember, this is a tree that if it was wisdom and not knowledge, then it would be knowing the wise way to use good and good and evil. And because there's a wise way to use evil, only Yahweh seems to know what that is, and that's why it's okay for him, not for us. Okay? And so I wouldn't connect it that way. But everything else you said was correct when you talked about the differences between wisdom and knowledge, etc. All right, Nadia.
Okay, Rabbi, bear with me. I have 3 questions. I don't know about the third one if you have me.
You start with one question, and we'll see if we make it in the back of the line.
Okay.
All right.
Now, help me understand this part where it says on Genesis 3:14, you are, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all livestock, more than all livestock, and more than every beast of the field. So that means the livestock was cursed? How does that look like?
Okay, we're going to do the same thing with cursing as we could do with evil. Okay, it's in the eye of the beholder. So do livestock just get to live out their lives and not be killed and used for food or killed by other animals? So there's a undesirable effect. Cursing is receiving something you did not want. Okay, having something happen to you that you did not desire. That's what cursing is, right? And so he said, I'm going to curse you more than all the livestock. Because the livestock are cursed in a certain way because they don't have the ability to do whatever they want necessarily. Men are going to have them as shepherds, and they're going to deal with them as farmers and all these other things.
Okay, I know Scripture does not explain, it doesn't go really into detail, but does that mean also that before the curse, animals were in a different state, and then after the curse, after they have an evil
I
intent?
don't know anything about that.
Okay. 2, the ground will bring, well, I guess it's the same thing. The ground shall bring forth thorns and thistles for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. Is he causing evil of the ground to bring good? Or
No, I mean, look, he wants their life to be hard. And everything's been too easy up to this point. And by the way, let that be a lesson for everybody. If you have it easy all the time, you're not going to learn anything. No growth comes out of that. You know, it's nice, it seems great, but you're not going to grow.
okay.
Okay, having it all easy is not going to bring any growth. And so he's saying, I'm going to put you in a great incubator to grow in. Okay? And we'll turn the pressure up nice and high. Okay? All right. All right, Gerardo.
How you doing? Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Rabbi, you know I'm gonna talk quick. I've asked both of these questions before. You kind of grunted at me. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, so I found a better way to ask it.
I'll find a better way to grunt.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, did I say that out loud?
Nah. So,
See, if you come up and be a wise guy, it does force the issue anyway. I can't help myself. Go ahead.
well, I felt like at times you be cheering me on, and you know I'm on live stream, whatnot. So, you know, I cheer you on right back, whatnot. But sometimes it's like, all right, Gerardo, you got to get this together. Something wrong with you, you know what I mean? I'm like, but Rabbi, how dare you? You know what I mean? So,
Is there a question coming?
yes, sir. So, out of everything we've talked about, right? When you processing and everything's correct, because that's what your grunt was, like, don't worry about that. So I don't want to get the false impression that I'm always usually right, because doggone, I've usually have been right lately. So how do I fall in the category to not question and get my answer and be okay with it without thinking too much? And this goes from chapter 2 to about 3 something. When you stopped off, I can refocus it on chapter 3:7 if you like.
Well, look, I mean, I understand the challenge sometimes is, especially if you find yourself on a roll and you're dealing with stuff and you're right about certain things and it turns out you're right, et cetera. It's all about being inside the structure and knowing your role in that structure. And then knowing when to get counsel, when not to get counsel, when to just accept the grunt of, hey, it is what it is, versus, you know, having something to actually do about it. Just don't get to the point where if you've been on a roll that seems pretty positive and you've been doing okay, that means that you don't need help or you don't need counsel. Because that's where you end up in the big ditch. Because you start cruising along and the speed starts getting some momentum and you think, hey, it's all good. Bam, right into the ditch. Okay? So, you know, you want to understand that when things are challenging, you tend to be much more awake and pay attention. But when things are going great, you tend to just not be quite as vigilant, and you end up in some trouble. All right? Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, he said, so I can still question it all, and I said, absolutely. All right? All right, live stream.
Okay, from Ron Bowe, is it not a great mercy that the Father did not allow them to eat of the tree of life?
Oh, absolutely.
Michael says, in the walk of life, are we meant to walk it out with the spirit of Torah, i.e., not dwelling on the things that are contrary to Torah, and do it till the end?
Say that one more time.
It says, in the walk of life, are we meant to walk it out with the spirit of Torah, i.e., not dwelling on things that are contrary to the Torah, and do it till the end?
Yes. I like these quick one-word answers.
Selena Stevenson, the last thing you said, there is suffering on the way, and we don't often see good results from our struggle. How can we be encouraged to keep struggling when it feels like we're getting nowhere?
Okay. Very important point. Want to have everybody's attention? The struggle is the point. You're only focusing that the struggle is in the way. Think about what I just said, okay? You're just frustrated because the struggle is slowing you down or in your way or making something challenging, instead of realizing the struggling is the point. And then you can now pay attention to what you can get out of the struggling, because the struggle is to produce fruit, okay? And you're just looking at the struggle as a struggle. And it is. That's why they call it that, right? I mean, it's making something challenging and hard to get to whatever it is you're trying to get done or finish or go where you're trying to go. But it's the struggle that brings the growth. It's the struggle that brings the character. It's the struggle that works on some of the rough spots in your character that need to be worked on. So look at the struggle differently, and you won't feel this, you won't feel the same way about it. Next. There you go.
From Liza Vassar says, Rabbi, can you explain difference between evil versus abomination?
Okay. I don't know if I was going to say, let's wait till I finish the teaching because I'll probably cover it. Just think of abomination. Remember, all of these things are through your own, not your own, whoever is perceiving it, right? They're the way it's being addressed. And when Yahweh perceives something as being totally as bad and wrong as it can be, he calls it an abomination. Okay? Now, an abomination does not mean that it's necessarily suffering or harm or that. He just feels it's that wrong. So it's not necessarily about it being evil. Something's an abomination because it's at this most extreme level of wrongness. Okay? I don't know if there's a proper way to say anything. It's like the highest level of wrongness. All right? As opposed to evil. I mean, there's some massive amounts of evil that are allowed to happen on people and cause to happen on people that are not called an abomination necessarily. Okay, so when the abomination of desolation is set up in the holy place, what harm is that causing? It's just the highest level of wrong in Yahweh's eyes. It's not harming anything, right? What's it harming? It's something put in the temple that doesn't belong there, but it's extremely offensive and wrong to the Creator. So it's abominable. So I wouldn't call it evil necessarily, okay? Now, the person who did it may have intended evil because they wanted to cause suffering in the people and maybe cause suffering to the Creator, but his looking at it as this extreme level of wrong is why it's called an abomination. Does that help with the definition? We're resetting all the words. The whole lexicon is just messed up. Okay? All right, Rob?
From Just D, Romans 8, verse 15, how do we get rid of fear?
Okay, all of you, any of you dealing with fear need to listen to the Fear of Yahweh teaching like every month, over and over again. Because that is the answer to your fear problem. Because the whole subtitle to it was, if you learn properly to fear Yahweh, you'd never be afraid again. To those of you that are just struggling in general with fear, and if you've not counseled with me, if you have, you know that I've said this to you. If you haven't, then you don't know. But the answer to almost everything, I don't want to sound Christian because Christians say, Jesus is the answer to everything. No. The answer to all your problems, as far as like fear and all those things, is reality. Now, reality is going to be Messiah. It's going to be the truth. It's going to be the Torah, but reality. Most of the things you're afraid of aren't real. Or they haven't happened, and they might not happen, and they probably won't happen, but you're afraid anyway. So to fix most of your issues, bring reality in. Like the reality that this world is just a testing ground, so let's not get so upset about it. We're not staying here, okay? When I say we're not staying here, I mean we're not staying in this situation. He's coming, he's going to put his kingdom in place, and most of this mess is going to get fixed very quickly. All of it, eventually, right? Well, when you're still in the flesh, you're afraid of all the things that affect the flesh. And he says, who cares who could kill the body? It's just flesh. So be afraid of the second death, not the first one. And so bring reality in. Now, the reason I said this, and I joked about the whole Messiah thing, is because whenever I say that, people look at me like, well, the answer should always be Yeshua. It is. He is reality. He's the most real thing in the universe. All right? Because nothing's more real than truth. And he is truth. And so you need to bring truth in, reality in, and most of your fear should be something you can now deal with. But you might need a helper, a counselor, a coach, a therapist to help you walk through that journey of letting go of fear and walking in reality and truth. There's a book out there by, I believe, Dale Carnegie called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. The book was written like, I don't know, early 1900s. I mean, it's probably almost 100 years old. Okay? It's an old book. Now, that book, in it has statistics that say that most of what you worry about, we're talking like 90%, never happens. You worry about stuff that doesn't actually ever happen. Then of the 10% that does, 90% of that ends up not being as bad as you thought or not even a big deal. It's like 1% or 2% ends up being what you were afraid of. And so you're going to go and be afraid. Well, this sounds like COVID, doesn't it? 99 point whatever percent, everybody's going to be fine. So everybody should be afraid of the, 0.2% that, This is the truth, if you can embrace it. And you know that in your life. Think about everything you've ever worried about, how much of it actually happened. And when it did happen the few times, was it really as bad? After all, you're here. You survived. I mean, was it really as something that you should be that afraid of and that worried about? Because worry is a fear-based emotion, right? You're afraid of something, so you worry about it. You're worried that something is going to happen. Let go all of that. You are in bondage. This is flesh. Fear is flesh. Okay? Shalom is spirit. Emunah is spirit. Fear, doubt, worry, that's all flesh. Kill that flesh. Don't worry about all these things. Instead, become confident that if something happens, you'll handle it. You'll survive it and you'll handle it. Because you have a Messiah that you know, I can do all things through Messiah who strengthens me. Not if you're worried about it, you're not. You don't believe that verse at all if you're worried about it. Is there anything that doesn't fit into all things? I can do all things. Is there anything impossible for him? All things are possible for those who believe. I mean, how many more verses I got to throw at you? So what you're showing is you really don't believe yet. You're having a crisis of faith. If you believed, you'd stop worrying. And you're looking at me like, oh, but I believe. On some levels you do. I'm not saying you don't believe, but the fullness of belief, there's no fear in that. There's no doubt, there's no worry, there's no concerns. And fear always brings evil on you, others, whatever. Because you're going to make all kinds of bad decisions out of fear. So you're basically carrying a terrible shackling weight on you that you can just be unburdened of if you would just stop being afraid. And I can promise you something very important. This is super reality time. Okay? Worrying about it won't change how much it upsets you when it happens. Some of you act like somehow if I worry about it and then it happens, I won't feel as bad. That's a lie from wherever. Okay? That is just a lie. If you're afraid you're going to get sick and die, if you get sick and you're dying, you won't feel any better about it because you worried about it. You won't. If you're afraid your kid's going to get killed in a car accident and it happens, you won't feel any better about it because you worried about it for all the years until it happened. And what about if it never happens and you worried about it for no reason? In other words, there's no benefit to worrying about it. Concern is different. You have a concern, which means that you might be able to do something because you have a concern. Once you realize that you've done everything you can, everything after that's now worry and not concern. Okay? I have a concern, maybe because I've had pneumonia more than once, so I have a concern to be careful about making sure that I'm taking antioxidants and other things to help me and stuff for my respiratory because I'm concerned. I'm not worried. And as long as I'm doing everything I know I can do, I have no worry. But because of the concern, I'm taking an action. Okay? You're concerned that you're not going to get in the kingdom. You want to be there. So you do things to take actions. It's not a worry. It's like an awareness that, hey, if I don't do this, then this is going to happen. So I'm going to do this. You see the difference? So I don't mind you being concerned about some things. But recognize if you've done everything you can and you're still concerned, you're not concerned anymore. Now you're worried. I've never taught that before. Pay attention. All right? Because some of you might be thinking, what's the difference? That's the difference. A concern after you've already done everything you can. Of course, if you don't do everything you can, now you're concerned and you're worried. Because you're not doing anything. Do everything you can and have peace. All right? If you counsel with me, I will always ask the question, if it's something like this, and say, have you done everything you can? Yes, then let it go. Stop holding on to that worry. You've done everything you can. That's what you told me. Good, then let it go. But I can't let it go, and I don't know how to let it go. That's the flesh. You don't owe the flesh anything. Tell the flesh to be quiet. Your flesh is screaming all the time. Not out loud to us, it's screaming in your ear. Just tell the flesh to be quiet. Say, look, you're going to die soon anyway. Just, you're trying to kill that flesh. Of course it's screaming. Okay? Some of you are like the song, by the Eagles. You're stabbing it with your steely knives, but you just can't kill the flesh. It doesn't want to die. And it knows you're trying to kill it. And it's not happy. So guess what it wants to do? Make you not happy. That is the deal, okay? Embrace that reality, please. Put it to use in your life, you'll be happier. All right? You won't be as stressed, you won't be as worried, you won't be as afraid, and all that other negative junk. Amen? All right. All right. All right, Justin.
Let me see if I can get this out correctly. So evil is a matter of perception, whether it's ours or Yahweh's.
No, it's a matter of whoever's looking at it,
okay,
or receiving it or experiencing it.
Okay.
It's not just ours or Yahweh's.
Okay, so how do we discern the fact that if it's happening to us, discern the fact whether it's our perception or that we've actually done something to deserve that evil, that maybe it's coming from Yahweh, that we perceive it that way?
Okay, no, you're missing the point.
Okay.
It's not a perception problem that you're suffering or not. What you're trying to now figure out, though, is not whether or not it's evil, but whether or not it's something you caused.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so just so we're clear, evil is not a perception problem. If you're suffering, it's evil. Okay, that's the definition. If you're in pain, harm, suffering, destruction, ruin, that is happening in your life, that's evil. Now, why are you having that happen in your life? That's the question I think that you're asking.
That's the question I'm asking.
That's where you have to pray or get counsel and say, look, this suffering that I'm going through, I can't seem to connect it to anything. Because obviously you're only asking this because you would have immediately tried to think, is there anything I can think of that I'm doing that's bringing this on? And if you can't, then you pray and you get counsel. Okay, and say, Abba, I'm suffering, I'm in pain, this harm is happening to me, but I don't seem to know if it's something I'm doing so I can fix it. So if it's something I'm doing, please reveal it to me. And then you go to an anointed person and say, I'm going through some stuff, and I don't know why, and maybe you can help me figure it out. Okay? Good question. But just realize that whether or not something is evil is not the perception. Somebody observing harm, pain, or suffering, or receiving it, that's what's called evil. That's the person will label that as evil, okay? So when a nation sees Babylon coming to take them, they would say to Yahweh, why are you bringing this evil on us? And he said, because you don't listen. And I'm trying to get your attention. Because I think it shocked a lot of people the first time they maybe read that Yahweh brought evil. Now, this is going to make a lot of difference. And you know that evil spirit that King Saul gets? And some people are really messed up by that. Like, how would Yahweh give someone an evil spirit? Because they only think of evil as Satan. No, he gave him a spirit that was harming him and making him suffer, and he was in pain. Ooh, that's different. Makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? Because you're thinking that he gave him a spirit that made him evil. Because you only think of evil as being something from the Satan side of the spectrum. No, he decided to make him suffer. And that was evil. Okay. Anyway, Steve.
Alrighty. When you talked about dwelling in with Abba, or him dwelling in our lives, kind of gave me a thought that we could put ourselves in water and even maybe get wet, but unless we absorb the water, we're still not a part of it. So he can dwell in our lives or be in our lives, but if we're not dwelling or allowing him to be absorbed into our life, then he's just
I can work with
part
that
of the
analogy.
life.
The whole point being that it has to be active, okay? Something that's actively functioning. So absorbing it, as far as like, having it become a part of you, I guess that could work. The idea of dwelling and living in, actively, it's the activity, the functional activity of it that we're talking about. So that's a good analogy. All right, live stream. We'll wrap up with you guys.
Philomena Perez is not eaten of the tree, the first commandment given to man.
That's the first instruction given directly to Adam and Chava. Of course, he tells them to be fruitful and multiply, so actually you may say that that's actually the first commandment. Okay? That's the first don't instruction. Okay, it's the first negative commandment.
From Eva Yvonne, is there any way that Adam and Eve could have made it right after disobeying Yahweh?
It doesn't say, so we can't speculate.
From Michael and Ashley Condon, is the tree of knowledge of good and evil a metaphor for an active relationship with both good and evil? Conversely, is the tree of life a metaphor for unmitigated Torah?
Look, the hardest thing in this teaching on evil is that tree, okay? And the reason is this, because in eating of the tree, we, in a sense, who eat of the tree become like one of them on some level, okay? But it's not the same when they have it as when we have it. And that's the challenging part. Because you see, when we walk in good and evil, we don't know how to deal with evil in the right way. Only Elohim does, okay? So it's not like we understand how to implement these things the way he does and use them correctly the way he does, because evil is a tool in his toolbox. Harm, pain, suffering, ruin, destruction. He uses these things and has for all of time. But just because we're now aware of and we can actually cause and do these things purposely and everything else doesn't mean that we know how to do it correctly. Okay, and that's the thing with this tree that we have to be careful that is the difference. Because otherwise, we'd have to ask the logical question that everybody does ask, which is, if it makes us like them, why doesn't he want us to have it? It seems that it would be a good, my first time reading this through, as a kid, whenever it was, it seems like, wouldn't he want us to know the difference between, because it sounds like you're knowing the difference between good and evil and knowing about good and evil, but that's what we first think. Well, then why wouldn't he want us to know that? Because that's not what it's talking about. Remember, we're taking people that are beings that are not aware of evil, They're just only experiencing good, and now they're aware of it, they understand it, they have a relationship with it, and now they can do it purposefully, and this becomes a temptation to do things. And also, they have the ability to look at things as evil, which, by the way, when you look at something as evil, you respond to it differently than you would if you just looked at it as suffering with a purpose. And so their whole state got changed by this eating of this tree. So they have certain things now like Elohim, but not in the way he does. All right? We're very much made in his image, but we're not like him. But we're like him. We can be creative. We can bring life into existence. We give birth to children. We make things. We build things. We invent things. We do all kinds of things like Elohim does, but not like he does. You understand what I'm saying? It's like what he does, but it's not like what he does. It's not even, the slightest comparison. So the fact that there would be this awareness and relationship with good and evil, instead of just with good necessarily, that doesn't mean that they're handling it like he would handle it, which is why he didn't want them to eat of it. Does that make sense more now? It's a very hard concept to explain, which is why I spent the whole beginning of the teaching trying to get that through, because that tree is really challenging, okay, as far as trying to teach and explain about it. Because I think almost, how many of you thought that when you first understood about the tree, like, well, why wouldn't he want us to know about good and evil, right? I mean, we all thought that, didn't we, mostly? Because that can't be what it's about, because it doesn't make sense why he would want to keep that from us. So how can we look at it from a right perspective to understand, oh, that's why he doesn't want us to have that? All right. That's the same thing like with vengeance. I think that's a great comparison. What does he say vengeance is? Vengeance is mine. Why? Because he's the only one that can do it right. Same thing with evil. He's the only one that can utilize it correctly. So he doesn't want you doing vengeance or evil. All right. Anything else on live stream? We got time for like one more maybe?
Okay, well, one more. Okay, from Greg Wallen says, Rabbi, if we were to increase our ability to love our enemy, as Yeshua said, do you think we would perceive less in our lives as evil?
Again, I think the definition part is confused. I don't think that we would change the way we see evil. I think we would change the way we see wrong. Because evil is simply observing and knowing that somebody is suffering in pain, being ruined, destroyed, harmed. And loving your neighbor doesn't change that you see that. So you wouldn't see that differently. Okay, but you may look at your neighbor not as an enemy differently, or not look at their intent the way you've been looking at their intent, and knowing that, forgive them, Father, maybe they don't know what they're doing, might be a better way for you to be thinking than the way you were. But evil is more about, again, it's not a right-wrong thing. Right things can cause you harm. Yeshua did all the right things and they killed him brutally. He received and experienced evil doing all the right things. Okay? And I can do something right for somebody and it could cause harm. Because I don't know that whatever I'm doing is something that they didn't want to have happen and it's going to mess up whatever they're doing. And so it's about the suffering, harm, pain, ruin, damage, etc., causing that to someone or someone receiving that. So loving your neighbor will fix a lot of things. It won't change whether or not something that's happening is evil or not. Okay? All right. Now, looking at your neighbor as if they are evil, that's a whole different problem. We'll talk about that more when we get to evil as a state of being. But again, when you're looking at them as evil, you want to be looking at, are they causing suffering, harm, and pain? Not are they of the devil. Okay? It's just a different way of looking at it. Of course, the devil wants to seek what it can destroy. What he can destroy. So he does want to do evil. All right? Okay. All right, that's going to wrap it up.